I am Anna Merlo from Cenfor International that is organizing the webinar, and I am with my team, Laura Lentini. Laura, do you want to introduce yourself just to...
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We hope you will enjoy it. Yeah.
And Matteo Urbano is the technical person that he will help to manage the webinar. And Matteo, just...
Buongiorno a tutti. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the webinar.
Okay. And then I think we are waiting also for Enzo Rimedio, that is also from our team.
Good morning to everyone.
Oh, Enzo, buongiorno. Nicola, io direi che possiamo iniziare.
Quindi diamo inizio a questo webinar organizzato da Cenfor International sull'European Accessibility Act, che andrà in vigore a fine giugno del 2025. Siamo qui oggi per dare appunto uno sguardo alle implicazioni legali e tecnologiche. Anna Merlo di Cenfor ha già fatto i saluti, ringrazio Anna e tutto il team di Cenfor per l'invito a moderare questo webinar. Come vedete io parlerò in italiano, alcuni degli interventi saranno in italiano, altri in inglese e con la traduzione automatica dei sottotitoli che è offerta da Zoom dovremmo riuscire a intenderci fra le varie lingue. Ringrazio tutti i relatori di oggi che ci daranno un panorama appunto su aspetti legali e tecnologici dell'European Accessibility Act, di cui, come ricordavamo prima, insomma, ne stiamo parlando da tanto tempo, da tanti anni. I relatori di oggi sono tutte persone che si occupano di accessibilità da diverso tempo, da più di 10 anni, e quindi, come dire, ci sono tutte le carte in regola per arrivare preparati all'entrata in vigore dell'European Accessibility Act. Oggi saranno con noi Caterina Sganga, docente alla Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna di Pisa, Cristina Mussinelli, segretario generale della Fondazione LIA, Simon Holt, Disability Confidence Manager presso Elsevier, Simon Mellins, che è un consulente in editoria digitale e in accessibilità, sempre basato in Inghilterra. Con noi Stacy Scott, responsabile dell'accessibilità di Taylor & Francis, sempre editore internazionale con base in Inghilterra, e poi Christian Bernareggi del laboratorio, adesso sbaglierò il nome, Polin dell'Università di Torino qui in Italia. Non prendo ulteriore spazio perché appunto, come vedete, abbiamo un ricco programma di relatori con temi molto, molto interessanti, quindi lascio a loro la parola, raccomandando appunto di essere sufficientemente concisi nei loro interventi. Abbiamo concordato alcune diciamo, durate diverse degli interventi. Il primo intervento che ci vuole un pochettino posizionare su che cosa è l'European Accessibility Act, sulle implicazioni, gli obblighi e le opportunità, a cura di Caterina Sganga, a cui lascio la parola. Prego.
Buongiorno a tutti, grazie Nicola e grazie Anna e Cenfor per l'invito a essere qui con voi oggi. Il mio intervento si svolgerà in italiano, qualche breve parola in inglese per gli ospiti non italiani e poi ritornerò da voi in italiano. Good morning everyone, happy to be here with you. Today my speech will be in Italian. I trust in the fact that the Zoom subtitles will help bridging the language gap, but if you may want afterwards for me to follow up with any materials or documents related to my presentation, I will be happy to do so. Quindi, di ritorno a noi, mi sono stati assegnati tra i 15 e i 20 minuti per farvi un'introduzione sullo European Accessibility Act, quelle che io ho definito nel titolo del mio intervento implicazioni, obblighi e opportunità. Dovrei aver condiviso il mio schermo, ma fatemi sapere se riuscite a vederlo. Benissimo. Questo è quello che andremo a fare oggi insieme. Andremo a guardare il background dello European Accessibility Act e i suoi contenuti, con un dettaglio poi sugli obblighi che sono imposti dall'Act, in particolar modo quali sono gli oggetti e in che cosa questi contenuti si declinano. Questa sarà la parte più corposa del mio intervento. Seguirà poi una serie di riflessioni critiche sulle opportunità che questo Act ci offre e le conclusioni, quindi qual è la strada che abbiamo davanti ancora da percorrere. Cominciamo col background dei contenuti. Ci troviamo dinanzi a un Act che non nasce dal nulla, c'erano già stati degli interventi a livello euro-unitario in precedenza, prevalentemente nel settore dei trasporti, come potete vedere. Il momento di svolta arriva con la sottoscrizione da parte dell'Unione Europea quale singola delegazione della Convenzione delle Nazioni Unite sui diritti delle persone con disabilità nel 2011. Questo ha imposto non solo sugli Stati membri, ma sull'Unione in quanto legislatore una serie di obblighi che lo European Accessibility Act vuole in qualche modo consolidare nel loro adempimento. L'adozione di misure adeguate a garantire in uguaglianza l'accesso all'ambiente fisico, ai trasporti, alle information and communication technologies in ogni luogo e la promozione di ricerca e sviluppo nel settore, una messa a disposizione di nuove tecnologie a costi accessibili. Abbiamo già avuto una direttiva nel 2016, la 2012, sull'accessibilità dei siti web e delle applicazioni mobili di enti pubblici. È arrivata poi la strategia sulla disabilità della Commissione europea dal 2010-2020 che ha inserito l'accessibilità tra gli 8 ambiti di azione. Quali sono le problematiche che affronta lo European Accessibility Act? Copre aree di disabilità e anche limitazioni funzionali, quindi non disabilità strettamente intesa, ma anche correlate limitazioni, molto più di quanto fatto da testi precedenti. E va ad affrontare un problema molto serio, che era la differenza, le divergenze tra le legislazioni nazionali e le pratiche amministrative nazionali sui requisiti di accessibilità tra prodotti e servizi, perché questi causavano una serie di problemi. Ostacoli alla libera circolazione dei beni e dei servizi in formato accessibile, un impatto sulla concorrenza transfrontaliera, un disincentivo quindi di conseguenza per le piccole e medie imprese e le microimprese ad avviare iniziative in stati diversi da quello di appartenenza, nessuna possibilità di fare economie di scala transfrontaliere, quindi di conseguenza prezzi più alti del dovuto per i consumatori e poi soprattutto una scarsa copertura di prodotti e servizi nel mercato unico digitale. E questo è quello che l'Unione Europea ha voluto fare secondo la Commissione.
Scusi, dottoressa Sganga, faccio presente che noi non sentiamo l'audio del video.
Non riuscite a sentirlo?
No.
Mi dispiace perché l'avevo messo come condivisione anche con volume intero. Beh, se non lo vedete allora vi manderò il link perché è anche inutile vederlo e sentirlo solo con la lingua dei segni. In ogni caso questo era un video che spiegava con le parole della Commissione gli scopi dello European Accessibility Act e le sue varie declinazioni. Metterò poi a disposizione il link in chat così potrete vederlo con l'audio del vostro computer. Grazie per avermelo fatto rilevare. Quali sono gli obiettivi e le funzioni dell'ACT, la direttiva 2019-882 del 2019? Lo scopo è quello di contribuire al corretto funzionamento del mercato interno, questa è la principale giustificazione per l'introduzione della norma, attraverso un tentativo molto più pervasivo degli anni precedenti di ravvicinare le disposizioni legislative, regolamentari e amministrative degli Stati membri rispetto ai requisiti di accessibilità per determinati prodotti e servizi. Una legge quanto più possibile unitaria e convergente consente anche di facilitare lo scambio transfrontaliero e l'accessibilità transfrontaliera, nonché maggiore disponibilità di beni e servizi a costo inferiore. Come vi dicevo prima, le principali caratteristiche dell'ACT sono una copertura più ampia del concetto di disabilità e delle tipologie di disabilità e limitazioni funzionali considerate. Vengono a essere coperti anche gli anziani, le donne in gravidanza e le persone con minorazioni, e anche il numero di prodotti e servizi interessati dall'ACT sono superiori. Sono specificati esplicitamente i requisiti di accessibilità per l'immissione di prodotti e servizi nell'ambito di applicazione della direttiva e i requisiti funzionali collaterali, quindi secondari rispetto ai requisiti di accessibilità, sono molto più precisi e dettagliati anche attraverso un uso abbondante degli annexes all'ACT. I criteri funzionali di cui vi parlavo, lo vedremo fra poco, guardano alla modalità di funzionamento dei prodotti e dei servizi, quindi non costituiscono un'alternativa ai requisiti di accessibilità, ma entrano in azione quando i requisiti di accessibilità non possono essere implementati in toto. Quindi abbiamo un approccio bipartito. Quali sono i principi generali dell'ACT? Anzitutto gli operatori economici non potranno più immettere sul mercato dell'Unione prodotti e servizi che non sono conformi ai requisiti di conformità indicati nell'allegato 1. Per operatore economico si intendono i fabbricanti, i rappresentanti utilizzati, gli importatori, i distributori e i fornitori di servizi. Gli Stati membri possono fare uno step aggiuntivo rispetto all'ACT, cioè possono anche richiedere che l'intero ambiente costruito da parte dei fornitori e usato da clienti dei servizi che offrono si conformi a sua volta ai requisiti di accessibilità. Per evitare che l'ACT finisca per creare però una barriera all'ingresso troppo elevata per le microimprese sono, ma questo accade in realtà in tutta la legislazione europea in materia di piattaforme, ambienti digitali, quindi in questo caso è applicato lo stesso principio, è possibile che vengano esentate, ma gli Stati membri sono invitati a fornire delle linee guida per fare in modo che anche loro convergano quanto più possibile sulle norme nazionali di accessibilità. Gli Stati membri devono evitare di creare ostacoli alla messa a disposizione sul mercato di prodotti e servizi conformi allo European Accessibility Act e provenienti da altri Stati membri. Quello che cambia rispetto al passato è che abbiamo un intervento orizzontale su molteplici settori, il video ve li mostrava, ma ve li posso anche dire brevemente qui. Abbiamo i computer, i sistemi operativi, bancomat, biglietterie, check-in, smartphone, televisioni per i servizi televisivi digitali, i servizi telefonici, i servizi media audiovisivi, tutti i servizi correlati e annessi ai trasporti in qualunque forma, i servizi bancari, tra cui i bancomat, gli e-books, che è molto importante, e le piattaforme di e-commerce. I requisiti di accessibilità sono ora standardizzati a livello normativo e non più solo con una referenza indiretta degli standard ISO. È prevista anche la futura introduzione di norme armonizzate nella Gazzetta Ufficiale dell'Unione Europea, quindi un ulteriore livello di standardizzazione, e c'è una grande enfasi, prima poco riposta, su interoperabilità e informazioni da fornire ai destinatari dell'atto. Quali sono gli obblighi che vengono imposti? L'ambito oggettivo di applicazione, lo avete già visto, copre un novero molto importante di prodotti e servizi a livello orizzontale, copre però solo quei prodotti e servizi immessi sul mercato, la lista che vi ho fatto prima, dopo il 28 giugno del 2025, abbiamo ancora qualche mese di tempo. Ho diviso gli obblighi tra fabbricanti, importatori e distributori. Con la F vedete segnati gli obblighi per i fabbricanti, con la I quelli per gli importatori, con la D quelle per i distributori. Ovviamente i fabbricanti hanno degli obblighi più numerosi rispetto agli altri, alcuni sono in sovrapposizione. Sono obblighi di preparazione della documentazione tecnica necessaria a ottenere la dichiarazione europea di conformità e la correlata marcatura CE, la predisposizione di procedure perché la produzione di massa in serie mantenga costantemente la conformità, l'apposizione sul prodotto delle indicazioni necessarie a consentire l'identificazione quale prodotto accessibile, o direttamente sul prodotto o sull'imballaggio se sul prodotto non è possibile, l'indicazione dei contatti dell'impresa, la fornitura di istruzioni e informazioni sulla sicurezza che siano chiare, comprensibili e leggibili per soggetti con disabilità, mentre tanto gli importatori quanto i distributori devono rendersi compartecipi rispetto alle autorità di verificare immediatamente l'eventuale non conformità del loro prodotto già immesso sul mercato, adottare misure correttive ove ciò non sia possibile, procedere al ritiro del prodotto dal mercato. Contestualmente, tanto gli importatori quanto gli distributori devono informare le autorità competenti a livello nazionale della procedura. L'importatore e il distributore sono responsabili di verificare se il prodotto fornito dal fabbricante sia in regola e anche se il fabbricante, il produttore, ha adempiuto agli obblighi dell'ACT. E anche in questo caso diventano anche loro dei poliziotti che devono informare le autorità competenti nel caso in cui ciò non venga fatto. Sempre l'importatore e il distributore hanno anche un ruolo importante di verifica della presenza della marcatura, della presenza delle informazioni di sicurezza e delle condizioni di stoccaggio e di trasporto che non devono pregiudicare la conformità. Tutta la documentazione correlata all'adempimento di questi obblighi deve essere trattenuta dall'importatore per 5 anni e fornita all'autorità di vigilanza. Obblighi simili, ma ovviamente tarati sul fatto che si tratta di servizi dematerializzati e non prodotti, è imposta sui fornitori di servizi. I requisiti di accessibilità sono molto dettagliati, ovviamente il tempo a mia disposizione è limitato, quindi non potrò andare a fare una disamina dettagliata di ciascuno di loro insieme agli esempi forniti, ma è bene dare qualche esempio, quantomeno quelli relativi ai requisiti generali per tutti i prodotti. Il primo requisito è relativo alla fornitura delle informazioni sull'uso del prodotto. Devono essere disponibili su più canali sensoriali e devono essere comprensibili, percepibili, con caratteri di dimensioni e forme idonee. La direttiva si occupa anche dei requisiti relativi a queste informazioni ove pubblicate altrove, non sul prodotto come su un sito web. Anche in questo caso deve essere data la possibilità di accedere all'informazione su diversi canali sensoriali e interoperabili con specifici dispositivi assistivi. Anche nella progettazione dell'interfaccia utente e delle funzionalità è richiesto che la comunicazione sia disponibile su più canali sensoriali alternativi. Se il canale è vocale, bisogna provvedere ad alternative all'uso della parola. Se è visivo, ingrandimento, luminosità e contrasto flessibili, sempre interoperabilità con dispositivi assistivi. E come vedete, la direttiva entra in un dettaglio che per noi è completamente nuovo, sulle tipologie di accessibilità che deve essere fornita per determinati tipi di disabilità. Pensate al daltonismo, se usa colori alternativa ai colori, se usa segnali acustici alternativa a questi segnali, se visivi modalità flessibili per migliorare la chiarezza dell'immagine. Se usa l'audio, un controllo di volume, velocità, caratteristiche e interferenze esterne. Se richiede controllo manuale, come interazione con il servizio, è necessario dare la possibilità di comando sequenziale e alternative alla motricità fine che potrebbero rendere non agibile, non accessibile il prodotto o servizio da parte di soggetti che abbiano un controllo manuale o una tattilità limitata. E allo stesso modo anche le modalità di funzionamento che richiedano estensione o eccessiva forza sono bandite. Anche relativamente all'epilessia si prevede che non debbano essere forniti dei trigger, che debbano essere fornite alternative all'identificazione e al comando biometrici, ove questi non siano nella disponibilità del soggetto. Guardando alle disabilità intellettive, si richiede che la funzionalità dia tempo sufficiente e flessibile per l'interazione e vi si richiede anche che i software e gli hardware utilizzati possano essere interoperabili con i dispositivi assistivi più diffusi, che era un elemento anche questo non coperto prima. Il problema dell'interoperabilità era particolarmente sentito. Abbiamo poi tutta una serie di requisiti specifici per tipologie di prodotti come i terminali self-service, gli e-books, i terminali interattivi per i servizi di comunicazione elettronica, i servizi di assistenza, i requisiti per tutti i terminali tranne quelli self-service e poi tutta una serie di requisiti generali per i servizi, tra cui anche in questo caso informazioni su funzionamento e interoperabilità, accessibilità di siti web e application online che seguono la regola del PUCS, quindi devono essere percepibili, utilizzabili, comprensibili e solidi. Lo vedrete ritornare spesso questa terminologia. Anche in questo caso devono essere fornite informazioni sulla accessibilità e la compatibilità con le tecnologie assistive. Abbiamo poi tutta una serie di requisiti ulteriori, oltre quelli generali che vi ho detto, per servizi specifici di comunicazione elettronica, di servizi di media audiovisivi, di servizi di trasporto passeggeri, e qua ci riferiamo ai sistemi di biglietteria intelligente, alle informazioni sui viaggi in tempo reale, all'accessibilità dei veicoli, delle infrastrutture e dell'ambiente. Stessa cosa per i servizi urbani, extraurbani e regionali e per i servizi bancari per consumatori, che garantiscano specialmente un accesso con dei metodi di identificazione e un accesso ai servizi di pagamento secondo le regole PUCS di cui vi ho parlato prima. Le informazioni, e questo è molto importante, devono essere comprensibili e fornite con un grado di complessità linguistica limitato al livello B2. Ancora una volta una disabilità che come concetto va oltre a quello fisico e guarda anche alle varie e variegate forme di disabilità intellettiva. Abbiamo poi dei requisiti specifici molto interessanti per i libri elettronici, direi finalmente, anche ad uso delle biblioteche, con una possibilità quindi di anche rimuovere i digital rights management che blocchino l'accessibilità. L'accessibilità, questo è un intervento molto gradito che non proveniva dal diritto d'autore ma viene dallo European Accessibility Act, e requisiti ulteriori relativi al commercio elettronico molto simili a quelli che avete visto per i servizi bancari. Due degli ostacoli più importanti di interazione per soggetti disabili con il mondo del digitale. Come vi dicevo, ove i prodotti e i servizi non possano rispondere pienamente ai requisiti di accessibilità, o è possibile che i requisiti di accessibilità possano essere superati da ulteriori tipologie di tecnologie, è possibile fare ricorso ai criteri funzionali di prestazione, che anziché guardare ai requisiti fissano degli obiettivi da raggiungere, che vedete nel riquadro in alto a destra. Quindi tipologie di utilizzo che devono essere garantite dal prodotto o dal servizio utilizzato. Si tratta quindi di criteri e non requisiti che guardano quindi a un obiettivo e non allo strumento attraverso cui raggiungerlo. Si parla quindi di una misura per così dire succedanea, ma comunque interessante da tenere in considerazione, una sorta di backup solution. L'allegato 2 poi, e qui vado molto velocemente, contiene una serie di esempi di come ciascuno dei requisiti che vi ho fatto vedere può essere implementato. Vi invito ad andare a guardarlo perché è espresso in linguaggio peraltro non tecnico, quindi comprensibile e commestibile anche a non giuristi, e concretizza in maniera non vincolante in che modo i vari requisiti che vi ho fatto vedere possono essere nella pratica realizzati nei prodotti e servizi da rendere accessibili. E come vedete sono molto dettagliati punto per punto. La procedura di valutazione di conformità è un obbligo del produttore, importatore, distributore di prodotti o di servizi, che deve implementare tutta una serie di processi che vi ho fatto già vedere: documentazione tecnica, provvedimenti necessari per garantire la conformità alla documentazione tecnica, apposizione della marcatura, speculari ovviamente per il fornitore di servizi, per garantire la possibilità di circolare sul mercato. La dichiarazione è una dichiarazione europea standardizzata, la marcatura deve essere apposta in maniera visibile, leggibile e indelebile. Sono le autorità di vigilanza che sono determinate a livello nazionale ad avere competenze di indagine, verifica e anche di richiesta di modifiche o ritiro dal mercato del prodotto. La Commissione europea può intervenire su obiezioni che vengono mosse da fornitori di servizi e produttori di beni a livello nazionale, quindi appellarsi contro un eventuale ritiro dal mercato. Quindi la Commissione ha una sorta di potere ombrello sull'intera procedura. Le sanzioni sono invece stabilite a livello di Stati membri e devono essere effettive, proporzionate e dissuasive. Gli Stati membri devono comunicarle alla Commissione. Le sanzioni devono essere proporzionali con la gravità della violazione e con il numero di soggetti coinvolti negativamente dalla violazione. Tutti gli obblighi che vi ho fatto vedere sono limitati e sono esclusi nel caso in cui l'adozione dei requisiti di accessibilità comporti degli oneri sproporzionati economici per il produttore o fornitore e nel caso in cui ovviamente non comportino una modifica sostanziale della natura del prodotto o servizio. Per calcolare se l'onere è sproporzionato vengono tenuti in considerazione tutta una serie di elementi, tra cui i costi netti per l'implementazione delle misure di accessibilità, i cosiddetti costi netti di conformità, e invece quelli che sono i costi netti di produzione generale del bene, quindi le spese correnti di produzione e sviluppo. Se nell'analisi costi-benefici, tenendo conto ovviamente del vantaggio di maggiore accessibilità, l'onere di produzione del bene o servizio accessibile è sproporzionato, il requisito viene meno. Molto brevemente, così mi avvio alla conclusione, quali sono le opportunità che offre lo European Accessibility Act? Per gli operatori economici c'è un'eliminazione delle barriere alla libera circolazione, una riduzione dei costi e barriere di accesso al mercato, una maggiore competitività transfrontaliera e di cooperazione fra imprese attraverso i confini, e questo comporta la possibilità di utilizzare economie di scala. Per gli operatori pubblici, quindi le istituzioni e gli enti pubblici, abbiamo minori costi, abbiamo maggiore scelta, abbiamo maggiori possibilità di partenariati pubblico-privato e anche maggiore certezza nell'implementazione di misure di accessibilità, che comporta ovviamente meno rischi e quindi meno dissuasione, meno chilling effects rispetto alla non implementazione per paura di violazione di diritti altrui. Per i soggetti con disabilità e gli anziani significa molto più prodotti e servizi accessibili sul mercato, una maggiore qualità e controllo con la standardizzazione dei requisiti, una copertura maggiore di disabilità, di numero di disabilità e limitazioni funzionali, minori barriere di accesso in settori chiavi e poi sempre più lavori che richiedono expertise in disabilità disponibili. Qual è la via che però ancora ci resta da fare? Resta limitato, seppure molto ampliato, il numero di prodotti e servizi disponibili, non coperti dall'atto, non è coperta la salute, la sanità, non è coperta l'educazione, la casa, la domotica, gli elettrodomestici. Abbiamo tante esenzioni sui costi eccessivi, l'avete visto, che rischiano di impattare sull'effettività della norma. I requisiti relativi poi all'ambiente che incorpora i servizi e la sua accessibilità sono rimessi agli Stati membri. Questo potrà portare a delle frammentazioni. Non ci sono misure effettive nel caso di violazioni da parte di autorità pubbliche e non private, quindi la via da fare è ancora tanta. Sicuramente dovremmo attentamente monitorare l'implementazione dell'atto, quindi fare un impact assessment successivo, verificare gli effetti della permanente discrezionalità in capo agli Stati membri e pensare probabilmente all'opportunità di ulteriori interventi settoriali all'interno del quadro fornito dall'Act. Grazie mille per l'attenzione, a disposizione per domande e commenti a seguire.
Grazie mille Caterina Sganga per questo bel panorama un po' di corsa ma molto esaustivo di tutte l'European Accessibility Act e delle sue implicazioni. Vi invito a scrivere le domande sia durante gli interventi che alla fine in chat che poi posso girare ai relatori. Credo che Caterina possa stare con noi anche ancora qualche tempo, qualche minuto, quindi se poi non ci sono domande adesso, ma ce ne sono in seguito, potrà rispondere anche successivamente. Iniziamo adesso ad andare più ad occuparci di libri. Lascio quindi la parola a Cristina Mussinelli, segretario generale della Fondazione ELIA Libri Italiani Accessibili. Prego, Cristina.
Hi, good morning, everybody. May you see my slides?
Yes? Sì, le vediamo.
Sì.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will make a focus more detail on the publishing industry and what the European Accessibility Act means for publisher and other actor in the publishing value chain. Just few words on Fondazione ELIA. May you see the new slide?
Yeah.
Okay. Fondazione ELIA is a kind of strange organization because it is a no-profit foundation that was created in 2014 by the Italian Publishers Association in collaboration with the Italian Blind Union. We also have as members the Italian Dyslexia Association and one specialist organization that is the Library for the Blind Regina Margherita di Monza, who is the organization who produced the traditional version of accessible publication, mainly Braille or larger character for textbook, and we work with them since many, many years. We also have as a member the most important library run platform, working in the library world, because the goal of the foundation was to offer to the people with disabilities exactly the same experience and possibility of reading as any other reader. We also have as a member Casalini, who is one of the most important aggregator providing Italian publication in the library world worldwide. Which is the goal of the foundation? The foundation aims to support the publishing industry in providing access to reading and digital publication for the beneficiaries that were previously presented. We are active member in all the standard organization working in the definition of standard for the publishing industry, and what we provide is not something that is invented by Fondazione ELIA, but is the application of the standard available in the publishing market for accessibility. What really required the European Accessibility Act for the publishing industry? As e-book are considered as a service and not as a product, the most important thing is to create an accessible digital publishing ecosystem. And for the creation of digital publishing ecosystem is required that all the actors in the value chain make their own work. So the first thing is for publisher or content creator in general to produce digital accessible publication following the standard, mainly the standard that can be applied for the Accessibility Act are EPUB, because it's the most important and refollowable one, and also provide the accessibility metadata describing the characteristic of the file. The characteristic of the file can be provided in two different formats. One is ONIX, that is the format that normally go aside the file in the commercial distribution value chain, or EPUB metadata that are files that are embedded in the file EPUB itself, and then can be used also for search engine optimization, research, and other activity. The metadata in the publication will be then sent to distribution platform that need to include this information, especially on metadata, in their system, and then can be, from the aggregator, distributed to all the store, that could be online store, bookshop, digital libraries, and e-commerce website, that could be, for example, the commerce website of the publisher itself. It's important to allow the people to use publications that are distributed in the mainstream distribution channel, also to make purchase and loan activity in autonomy. So also the payment system should also be accessible. And the last element of the chain are the reading devices that can be both reading devices like Kobo, Kindle, so product for the commission, or reading solution in digital format that could be the one that are used, for example, in educational platform or also publisher website. What is specific for the Act for Publishing Industry? Ebook, as I explained before, are considered service provider, so include publisher, but all the other economic actor involved in the book distribution. That means distributor, online retailer, e-commerce website, mobile apps, online platform. Software reading solution, DRM, because it's explicitly indicated in the text of the act that DRM solution must not impede the accessibility of the content. There are solutions that are more complex in this area, but there are also solutions that don't have any of this problem, and metadata. Hardware ebook reader are instead considered as a product. It's also important to highlight that as the directive include also e-commerce website, all the e-commerce in the publishing industry who sell also physical books are not micro enterprise should comply with the directive. What it means for a publisher to be accessible and to comply with the legislation. First of all, means to produce new publication in born accessible format. Then there is the backlist, and as ebook are considered as a service, the Act is not very clear about the backlist, but as is everything that is made available on the market, we consider that the backlist could be made accessible. It could be invoked, for example, the disproportionate burden if the cost of making accessible all titles that maybe sell very few copies can be demonstrated as explained before. They need to produce and distribute metadata. We are working a lot as Fondazione LIA, both supporting publisher in the production of accessible publication, but we are also working with distributor and retailer to make them able to distribute the metadata and to provide the accessible information on accessible publication on their website, because if they are not available for the end user, the title will be not known as accessible, especially as the readers need to buy the title. They need to be able to buy the title knowing if the title fits their needs or not. Then it's important to be sure as a publisher that the accessible platform, that the platform you use to sell your ebook or the reading solution you have in your environment are accessible. And what is really important as the legislation is in place and will be in place is to start working on accessibility since the very early stage of any design and production of publication of a website, because the cost of including accessibility since the beginning will be, even an additional one, will be less than remediating publication on website that will not be considered as accessible since the first stage. What are the important elements that we are working a lot on to support the publishing industry? Awareness. I think that right now the publishing industry is quite aware, and the publishers are mainly working on this topic. We have made a survey in another European project that is named APACE mapping, and it's the first of this kind at international level, the state of the art and the awareness of the European Accessibility Act in the publishing industry. And we saw that publishers are quite aware, not all of them have started to work on that, but what we think is missing is the knowledge and awareness in the other actor of the value chain. We see less attention to the requirement of the Accessibility Act, for example, in the online store and online distribution system. Knowledge is absolutely fundamental, and it's very important to acquire the skills that are needed to be able to embed accessibility as a strategic asset of the publisher. We do a lot of training, both in Italy but also internationally, and we see that this is one of the most important elements in the company to acquire. Then there are tools. There are some tools that may support the publisher and the industry in creating accessible publication. We are working, and Gregorio Pellegrino, who is our Chief Accessibility Officer, is a leader of a group working on providing to InDesign the information to make possible from InDesign, so from the traditional publisher publication, and export more accessible in a more easy way. And I think this is a very important element. Standard, it's important to work on standard because you will be required to comply with standard, and there are also possibility to have a conformance check by the national authorities of the compliance on what you have produced to standard. And we are also working a lot on innovation because we believe that possibly in the future, maybe some AI-based tool may support some of the activities that are foreseen. So which is the roadmap that someone willing to comply with the Accessibility Act need to do? First of all, accessibility must become a fundamental resource and a fundamental part of the strategy of the company. And we believe that it will be very important to have an accessibility responsible in the company, who is the one who can coordinate, especially if you are a big company, all the activity of the different other departments. It's important to know which is the state of the art where you start from, because to understand how you work also, for example, in design, or which are the information that you already provide to the retailer, it's important. It's important to have a roadmap. Accessibility is a journey. You cannot solve everything in one shot. So I think it's important to create a roadmap and to try to achieve step-by-step important milestone. It's important to identify the skill gaps, and I think that training and consultancy are very important element. For sure, it's important to adapt the workflows because accessibility must become one of the elements that could be considered. And last but not least, accessibility must also be communicated because, as explained before, end users need to be aware of the level of accessibility of the service you're offering them. These are some examples of the training course that we provide to publishers, but also to other organizations. These are examples also of the skill you need to acquire. It's important to understand that the publishing industry is in many cases asking to external supplier to produce both a publication or website. So it's really, really important that not only the publisher industry, but also the supplier working with publisher need to be aware of the new requirement, because right now this is also an area where there is less knowledge and less awareness. Born accessible versus mainstream, it's very, very important. Right now, accessible publications are mainly produced afterwards that the publication is produced and sold on the market, and the main requirement of the Act is to produce accessible content and to distribute this accessible content in the mainstream distribution channel. So this is very, very important. Is automatic testing enough? I'm sorry, but not. Automatic testing can check only around 30% of what is missing in a publication or in a website. So a lot of manual test by knowledgeable people is still required. We hope in the future this may become better, but right now this is the situation. What we do also for publisher, we do a lot of quality insurance because especially, as I told before, most of the publications are also produced by external supplier. It's important that the publisher who is responsible of the compliance with the law is sure that the publication or the metadata produced are in line with the requirement. We also offer a certification process where we test title by title all the files produced by the publisher. And in this case, we also produce the accessibility metadata that then can flow along the value chain. In Italy, especially, we have created a catalog that now have more than 40,000 born accessible mainstream ebook that is also the point of reference for all the institutions working in this field to know that there are these titles produced by the publisher. It's important because, for example, in the library loan service, MLOL can use this information that we provide to create a special section in the catalog of the library to show that also in the library loan service there are accessible publications in line with the requirement. So last but not least, the European Accessibility Act is a game changer for all. It's important that also publisher and the other actor include end user in the loop, because end user may be used to have accessible publication only by specialist organization, and they may not be aware that the publishing industry is moving forward. We have seen in this year that all the times that we have provided information in collaboration with the people we work with, for example, Editore Mulino, who has a platform that is named Pandora Campo, that is now fully accessible. The end user, when they found that there is an accessible publication in the main distribution channel, sometimes are even surprised of the new possibility offered and very happy to use this publication on this platform instead of asking to specialist organization, because in any case, a special organization can provide a title with some delay and sometimes in a different format from the one that is used by all the other readers. That may be, for example, a problem for educational content where the students have the same platform and the same book, and the people with disability have a completely different flow and completely different tool. So if you want to know more about the AI in general, we have published in 2019 a white paper where we describe all the information related with the Accessibility Act, defining also the role of each actor, and also provide information on the different standards and both for publication, web, and metadata. We also have a newsletter, so if you want to be updated on what's going on, the newsletter is not only providing information on what Fondazione EAA does, but we also try to provide an overview of what's going on at international level and especially in the world of standard. Thank you very much.
Grazie mille a Cristina Mussinelli, segretario generale della Fondazione ELIA, e grazie anche ovviamente alla Fondazione ELIA per tutto il lavoro svolto. Sono veramente un punto di riferimento nazionale e internazionale molto importante. I'm now leaving the stage to Simon Holt, who then has to leave us a bit earlier. Simon Holt is Disability Confidence Manager at Elsevier, based in the UK, and we'll talk about what Elsevier does for accessibility. And
thanks very much, and thanks for having me. It's really nice to see everybody today. My name's Simon Holt. I lead content accessibility efforts at the science publishers Elsevier, and I'll use the same disclaimer as earlier on. So my talk is going to be in English today. I'm hoping that maybe the auto translation subtitles will help those of you who prefer Italian. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the accessibility program at Elsevier, how we're responding to the European Accessibility Act and beyond as well. Next slide, please. So I think the most important thing to think about is why we're doing this and who is it for. So as well as being a publishing professional, I'm also a visually impaired person myself. So this is really important for me personally as well as professionally. In fact, when we think about the amount of people with disabilities in the world, according to the United Nations, around 15% of the world's working age population, so those between age 16 and 64, have a disability. That's over 1 billion people worldwide. And indeed, I was speaking recently to George Kershaw, who is the person who invented the EPUB, and George said that he'd read somewhere that there are indeed more people with accessibility needs in the world today than there are left-handed people. So we're talking about a lot of people here. And so therefore, when we're thinking about why this is important, we need to consider that our job as publishers, and obviously I'm talking about this as a publisher here, is to curate, enrich, and disseminate information. And really, when we're thinking about people with accessibility needs, this is a large proportion of the researchers and students that we serve every day. So this, I think often accessibility is seen as kind of a slightly niche other thing for a few people. Actually, no, this is huge. And actually, this will make life much better for a considerable number of people in the world. Next slide, please. So, you know, what is this legislation about? And basically, it's about making the lives of people with disabilities more independent, empowering people, and making sure that everybody has equitable and equal access to information, right? We believe that this is a human right. We also need to make sure that the products that we are producing and the services that we're providing, as Christina says, are fully accessible. And so everybody has the same opportunity to become educated, to get information and knowledge. Actually, knowledge shouldn't be a privilege. It should be something that everybody has access to. And what these laws are about are really making sure that the playing field is balanced up and made more fair. And I think sometimes when we think about accessibility legislation, there can be a slightly curmudgeonly view about this, saying, you know, this is compliance and this is something we have to do. And actually, no, this is about people. This is about empowering people. This is about making sure that everybody has access to knowledge, information, and education. I'm really proud to be part of that. And I hope that everybody on this call feels proud about that as well, because fundamentally, when we're in information and education and publishing and standards, that's what we're here for, making sure that everybody is able to have access to the information that they need. Next slide, please. And so similarly as publishers, you know, how does this play in to what we're doing? Well, you know, ultimately, what we care about is publishing accurate, complete and relevant information. We talk a lot in the publishing world, for example, about open access, but actually is something really open if somebody can't access it? As a visually impaired person myself, I'm pretty tired actually of purchasing items. So, you know, earlier on we talked about things like televisions and stuff, and then not being able to access them because they're not accessible. And as a publisher, I really feel that it's important that we're publishing content and publishing on platforms that everybody can access. And so therefore, when we think about the European Accessibility Act, it really speaks to our mission in terms of advancing science and enriching knowledge, as well as obviously disseminating information. And I think these laws, so the European Accessibility Act, but also the new act in America that I'll touch on briefly later on, really helps us provide a bit of framework and guidance around these things and really bring them to life, from aims to kind of something with structures and reality. And one of the things that I really like about the laws is that because they're laws, everybody has to do them. So if you're a researcher or you're a student, hopefully it shouldn't matter which publisher or which organization you're accessing your content from. You know that you'll be guaranteed the same level of accessibility. I think that's really exciting personally. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to spend too long on this slide because I think it's been covered quite comprehensively elsewhere, but the main thing that I wanted to make clear is that for the publishing industry, which is clearly the bit that I'm a part of, the two main bits that apply to us are the ebooks bit and the e-commerce bit. So obviously we publish a lot of books, but also it's about the ability to log in, to find a book, to learn about that book, to pay for the book, and to download the book, and then obviously to access the book as well. So really what we're thinking about here isn't just the content itself, but it's the journey that a researcher or reader goes on in terms of accessing that content as well. And so obviously, hopefully we're all familiar with the timelines by now. The law was passed in 2019 and comes into force on the 28th of June next year. Next slide, please. And so in terms of the requirements for ebooks, again, I feel this has probably been covered quite comprehensively elsewhere, but it's worth thinking about all the various touch points that a reader has with books. So we're talking about image descriptions, we're talking about audio and video transcripts and captions, we're talking about publishing in accessible formats as well. And all of these things are designed to ensure that however somebody accesses a book, they're able to do so in an equitable way. And I think this will be very helpful, not just for people with disabilities, but also because actually we all learn in different ways. And some people may prefer an audio version, other people may prefer to read with different colors and backgrounds and fonts and that kind of thing, right? And actually what this is about for me isn't just talking about a category of people, but more thinking about making our content more flexible so that people can learn in their own way, which you know, is really what our publishing industry is all about. Next slide, please. And so similarly for the e-commerce services, hopefully this is just a bit of a reminder that really what this is about is the ability to independently access the e-commerce journey, right? So to log in, to find what you need, what you want to buy, to learn about it through metadata, to purchase it, to download it, and to read it. And for me, as a visually impaired person, the metadata bit is probably the most exciting bit of the European Accessibility Act, because that's the bit that will give you, that will tell you what accessibility features are present in a book and what are not. And therefore you're not going to run the risk of buying something and then not being able to access it. And for me, that's going to be quite revolutionary. So I think it's really great that the e-commerce bits and particularly the metadata elements are part of the European Accessibility Act requirements. Next slide, please. And so obviously I'm coming at this as a publisher point of view, and the publisher that I represent is a large publisher, right? We publish about 17% of the world's scientific content. Clearly, every publisher will have a slightly different challenge. So for some, it will be that they publish highly complex content. For others, it will be that they're quite a small publisher and they have resourcing challenges. For us, our challenge is that we publish a lot of content. Some of it's quite complex. We publish quite a lot of different types of content as well. So we publish many books, many journals, and as Christina said before, this is a journey for us. So we're starting off with books, we're going to be moving on to journals in the future. Next slide, please. So how are we looking at kind of accessing this? Obviously, it's quite a lot to get your head around. It's a big program of work. To give you an idea, we not only publish about 2,000 books a year, we have about 87,000 books in our backlist. And so therefore, it's quite important to have a programmatic approach. So you can see here, I've put in a couple of links about our approach to the European Accessibility Act. We have a statement around that you can read in quite a lot of detail, the approach we're taking, but also in terms of accessibility, we believe in putting people first. So we have an accessibility team that I'll talk a bit more about in a minute, but we engage with end users with accessibility needs on a really regular basis to make sure that what we're doing is the right thing, both at platform level and at content level, and to make sure that when problems do arise, because we're not going to get everything right all the time, though obviously we learn when mistakes do happen, to make sure that these get fixed, and that really when somebody has a challenge, they have a human being that they can talk to, who will help them and help us solve the problem, because often it's about a conversation and a dialogue to understand what the problem is, and obviously try and make sure that it gets fixed. Next slide, please. So we take a programmatic approach to the EAA, right? As I said, we have a lot of content, we have a lot of different types of products and services that we need to be able to fix. So we're thinking about everything from our research publishing to our textbooks that have quite a lot of ancillaries, flashcards, PowerPoints, that kind of thing, to our customer service offering, and obviously our e-commerce platforms as well. And so essentially, we have across the business, we have a central team with a program manager, and we have some SMEs supporting him. So I lead on the content side, and we have my colleague Ted Geese, who leads on the technology side. And then throughout each division, we have accessibility champions who lead the work in their department. We also have project managers and business analysts, delivery managers, who are making sure that the work actually happens on time, on schedule. We feel this is the only way to go about it, because otherwise what's going to happen is, because we're such a big organization, things are going to get lost in the weeds, and we're going to suddenly find that we're not compliant in some way, or we're not doing what we need to do. And so therefore, what we've done is taken this central approach where we're setting requirements and prioritizing actions and deciding on the strategy, and then decentralizing the actual work to the departments, because obviously the people who work on each of the products are the people who mainly are the experts about exactly how it's going to work for their product and their users and readers and customers. I think the most important thing to say here, that we have strong support from senior leadership. That's really important, not only in terms of strategy, but honestly, in terms of getting those checks signed, and in terms of making sure that we have the resources to do the job, and actually explaining to the senior leadership how what we're doing isn't just a compliance thing, but really helps us reach more people and achieve our goals in terms of disseminating content, really has proved very helpful, because it means that it's changed the narrative from a do we have to how can we, and how can it help us to achieve our kind of commercial goals and research goals, etc., and engagement goals. Next slide, please. And so I thought this would be a good slide to share here, just because it kind of highlights the main things that we're focusing on, as I said, with this programmatic approach across the organization. The stuff that I'm working on really is in the right-hand column. As I mentioned, it's about image descriptions and video accessibility and formats and metadata and that kind of thing. As you can see here, I think we have currently 86 people across the organization for whom accessibility is featuring prominently in their job. So clearly, this is a big undertaking for all of us. Next slide, please. And so I thought it might be helpful here just to give you an idea of what good looks like, right? So by next June, our go forward publications, so our front list in terms of books, will certainly be accessible. We're kind of more than there. We will definitely be on time for that. We will also have made a good start in terms of the backlist as well. So prioritizing the most used and the most sold titles and putting an in-demand service there to make sure that if there's other titles that people need, they can request those, and we will get those to them in an agreed amount of time. This seems to be best practice across the industry at the moment. And then obviously moving forward, we're then going to be addressing other types of content. So chiefly thinking about our journals program, which obviously for a publisher like us is a significant amount of content. Next slide, please. So I wanted just to give a sense of what a roadmap could look like, right? And to give this idea that Christina was talking about, that we're talking about here, this isn't a one and done situation, right? This is something that we will continue to work on as we progress over the months and years. And that's why having a programmatic approach that's resilient and robust will really help us, because it's not just a project, a one and done kind of thing, but actually like something like privacy or security, this is something that will continue to evolve as technology improves, as standards change, as maybe laws change as well. So we need to really take account of that and think about what we're doing in the longer term as well. Next slide, please. And so I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about another act that is coming down the pipe. So the Americans with Disabilities Act Title II, which is coming in April 2026. A lot of people have started to ask me about this, so I thought it was worth just touching on it. The good news is that and the EAA are both based on the same standard. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, AA, which is great. So it's not like one contradicts the other. There are some differences between the two, mainly in terms of who the legal onus pertains to. So it's publishers for the European Accessibility Act, it's publishing institutions like university and hospitals for Title II. And what that really means is the way that this will be enforced will probably be slightly different between the two. The reality is that both of these acts and other acts like the Canadian Act and Australian Act, etc., are all based on the same set of standards. And it means really and truly the best way to make sure you're compliant is to make sure that all of the material that you're involved with, whether you're a publisher or whether you're a library, complies to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. If you do that, then you will be compliant with any of these laws around the world. Next slide, please. So finally, I just wanted to kind of put answer a few common questions, right? So, similarly to what Christina was saying, how can AI help and how it cannot? AI is a labor-saving tool and a good start, right? For alt text, I think that it can be used to draft some kinds of images, photographs and illustrations. It's really not very good at dealing with some other kinds of images where some interpretation might be required, charts and graphs and that kind of thing. And so therefore, I'm not going to say don't use AI at all, but please proceed with caution and always make sure you have human beings, subject matter experts, really validating everything that comes out of AI, certainly from a content point of view. I think it's a helpful tool. It's not a magic bullet. Authors, where do authors come in terms of alt text creation? So each publisher will have their own ideas about that. For us, we feel that the best use of authors' time and their expertise is in terms of reviewing content. We feel we did some testing in terms of authors writing alt text themselves, and we found that even though we sent some quite comprehensive instructions, authors didn't necessarily always engage with those. And we found basically that what we ended up with was often quite unusable and maybe similar more to an image caption than an alt text description. So we actually are finding that it's much more efficient to generate the alt text ourselves using a mixture of AI and SMEs, subject matter experts, and then have authors review this at proof stage. And then finally, in terms of the backlist, as I mentioned before, this is going to be a multi-stage process, right? We're clearly not going to be able to remediate 87,000 titles at once. So what we're doing is we're starting off with the most recent titles and the most used titles, and then we're going to have a multi-phased approach. Eventually, our hope is that everything gets remediated, but in the meantime, we're going to set up an accessible format request service to make sure that when people need a title, they're able to get it from us. That's it from me. I hope that was really helpful. Thanks very much.
Thank you to Simon Holt. It was really interesting to know what Elfriede has done and what we'll do. Really good speech. Thank you for your presentation. Before leaving the stage to Simon Mellins, there was a question, I think, for Katerina Sganga by Joe Elliott. If Katerina hears us.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. Do you think the Act will cover also passwords?
It does, in the sense that you're supposed to, for particular services, you're actually supposed to provide as a service provider systems of authentication that are compatible with accessibility requirements. And passwords are, of course, also covered by that. There is nothing in the preamble of the directive, nor in the preparatory works, that would suggest an exclusion of password in this respect.
Grazie, grazie mille. So I'll leave the stage to Simon Mellins, who is a digital publishing accessibility consultant with a speech. This title is Unlocking Knowledge, Unlocking Markets, Preparing Academic Publishing and E-Learning Content from the European Accessibility Act and other global accessibility legislation.
Right. Good morning, everybody. I realize you've heard an awful lot now, so there will be some repetition in here, so I'm going to skip over where that might happen. First, just to say thank you for inviting me to speak with such an impressive roster of speakers this morning. Really, we have some of the best people in the industry on this call. So for anybody listening, this is really a very powerful session to have been at and to hear all these brilliant people and their experiences. I'm going to talk about unlocking knowledge. Oh, just a moment, sorry. I'm going to talk about unlocking knowledge and unlocking markets, which is a positive spin on accessibility rather than the focus that you see in a lot of places around compliance. And I'm glad to see that we've had a lot of comments like that this morning already. So just briefly, who am I? I'm a digital publishing consultant. So I work with lots of different publishers and platform and software providers. I've got over 17 years of experience, having specialized in accessibility for the last 8 of those. I've worked across lots of different sectors within the publishing industry. Was a co-founder of the Publishing Accessibility Action Group in the UK, member of the Book Machine editorial board, and I host the Digital Publishing Podcast. We have some listeners in the audience today. This is just a slide showing some of the organizations I've worked with, but I won't bore you by reading through them. However, I'm not a lawyer. This is something that we all have to say a lot. So yes, when it comes to the European Accessibility Act, there is a lot of interpretation involved. So to be very clear, we are all doing that to the best of our knowledge and ability. We are not lawyers. I'm certainly not a lawyer. So nothing in this presentation should be seen as legal advice. Always get a company lawyer or retained counsel to sign off on any approach to accessibility. And with that in mind, let's talk a bit about the law. So as we've heard in great detail so far already today, the European Accessibility Act is indeed a directive, not a law, with an enforcement deadline of 28th of June 2025. Importantly, it uses the term ebooks, which was unusual for this type of legislation, but we shouldn't confuse that with EPUB. It is ebooks in a broader sense. It covers public and private sectors, products and services, content and platforms. And I've listed here some of the penalties that national legislation have cooked up for EAA transgressions, including the most aggressive in Ireland, where it's 60,000 euros and up to 18 months in prison. In each member state, a market surveillance authority is nominated, and they will be in charge of looking after how this happens. And I just wanted to also add that there's plenty of similar legislation arriving all around the world. I've added some of the regions here, so Africa, North and Latin America, East and South Asia, and the Middle East. Broadly speaking, meeting the requirements of the EAA will ensure content can be sold in most markets around the world. As Simon said just now, there is a broadly speaking, these legislations all target the WCAG. So what are the requirements of the EAA itself? There's not a huge amount of detail in the EAA about what ebooks and platforms need to do. It says that we need to work well with assistive technology, a flexible and dynamic layout, which means having good structure underneath, alternative renditions of content, which is image and video descriptions, synchronized text for audio, which mainly refers to closed captions. DRM must not block assistive technology, as we have discussed today. The provision of accessibility metadata, and I agree with Simon, that's really, to me, that's incredibly exciting part of this. And crucially, the EAA mentions the POUR principles from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So what are those? We have POUR, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Perceivable content can be perceived in different ways. So this is the receiving of information part. Operable is about operating and interacting with content using any medium somebody needs. Understandable, so it's content being presented in predictable ways. And robust, there's an awful lot of issues out there with accessible technologies crashing because of something not being written well underneath. The requirement in the EAA for accessibility metadata is not clear in terms of what it means on a technical level, but it is broadly interpreted as being, for EPUBs at least, EPUB Accessibility 1.1, which goes inside the EPUB file, and ONIX Codelist 196, which goes in the XML companion file, which goes for any format. Broadly speaking, these have similar information in them, although they're slightly different wording, but they are a summary of accessibility features and warnings and contact details for any queries. Crucially, this data needs to be available before download as well as after. So this is why ONIX is so important here, because websites can use that to display the accessibility properties of a given publication before somebody has actually acquired it. And in terms of content scope, this is perhaps the most contentious part of the EAA. As some of our speakers today have said, it's really not clear exactly whether backlist is in scope and in what way it's in scope. There is mention of a 5-year transitional period or grace period in the EAA for backlist, but it is not, well, it's not clearly explained, and it is not absolutely clear that that applies to publishing. So I would call that an unreliable principle. That doesn't mean everything has to be ready on day one, though. And as Simon just covered, the consensus in the industry is to have prioritized remediation of the most popular titles or whatever measure is appropriate, and then to log and respond to requests for specific titles in a timely manner. That priority plus request system is probably the only reasonable and feasible way to adapt content, just because nobody is going to be able to convert the entire backlist by the 28th of June 2025. We've heard some mention today of exemptions, and we have 3 exemptions to the EAA for disproportionate burden, which is the economic argument, and that really has to be argued for specific features. It's not there to exempt entire publications. Fundamental alteration, that would cover the entire publication. That's where, by making an accessible version, you're really making a completely different book. And then there is this exemption for micro enterprises. It's really important that we look at the detail of all of these, because, I mean, in disproportionate burden, it's only exempting features. We have to renew these every 5 years, and they could be challenged at the Market Surveillance Authority level or in court. So I encourage publishers to not cling to these exemptions. We're going to focus on 2 sectors. Firstly, we're going to look at academic and scholarly. And in scope is ebooks, including PDF ebooks, digital-only publications, and anything like. In terms of what's out of scope, well, print-only publications, because the legislation narrowly says ebooks. Journals, which is a contentious part, whether the EAA applies to journals is not yet clear. And research papers. Really what we're looking for is this term ebooks that's in the EAA. What does that cover. What do we mean by ebooks? And that can lead to some difficult situations when trying to work out what is in scope. So what are some of the challenges for academic and scholarly publishing? Well, very large backlist, some of it extremely old, complex content, so the image descriptions can be difficult to do. The authors are not always available to assist where needed. They're not always alive. And it can be hard to define book, as we just talked about. There are some mitigations. So building accessibility steps into new publishing workflow is obviously vital, as we've talked about today. Making use of exemptions where necessary, but again, with caution. And focus more on request response system than deep backlist. You don't need to worry about extremely old books that have not sold in many years. Those are the ones where the request system is the right approach, as long as those requests are logged properly and acted on in a reasonable time frame. And finally, I wanted to talk about accessible PDF, because this is getting asked about a lot. PDF is primarily a visual format, so it's never going to be as accessible as EPUB. And it can't fulfill all of the WCAG and therefore the EAA because of the reflow and resize requirements. But some improvements will make it possible to use it in disproportionate burden cases. The PDF UA standard that Adobe have come up with can be very helpful. They have a built-in wizard for doing this if you have Acrobat Pro. That also has an OCR feature as well. And if you have source files, then exploring best practices for PDF export can make a huge difference. For our other sector focus, we'll look at educational publishing. Now, educational publishing has a similar kind of scope, so ebooks, including PDF, digital only, and anything book-like. Not in scope will be print-only publications. Online courses, and the line between an ebook and an online course can be difficult. And interactive or gamified platforms, some education platforms, could not be reasonably called books. In terms of educational publishing content, it really can be very complex, especially for sort of textbooks and curriculum material. You can have complex layouts with non-linear ordering. Sometimes there isn't one clear ordering path through the text. Lots of images, interactivity, so quizzes and tests, puzzles, write-in sections, collaboration features. There's also quite often flashing content, which is regulated within the WCAG, and audio-video content, which means we need closed captions and video descriptions, well, often known as audio description, and available scripts. Now, the difference, of course, with educational publishing is the platform is a much bigger part of it because of the interactivity in lots of educational publishing. So you have to ask, can print-disabled readers operate all the features of the system and fully participate in lessons and homework? This gets really complicated. If you own the platform, then there's lots of development to do. And if you don't own the platform, then there's lots of questions to ask. So you have to look at annotations and notes and answer boxes and highlighting, and also general user interface accessibility. There are many additional WCAG criteria that apply if you own the platform as well as the content. So what can you do in these instances? Well, you could produce a fixed layout EPUB. That won't satisfy WCAG for reflow or resize. And interactives are limited and challenging to implement, but could be permissible under disproportionate burden. It really depends on the type of content. You could make a rich reflowing EPUB version, which is highly accessible, but again, limited because activities aren't actually possible usually without your own custom platform. You could develop your own custom platform based on HTML or EPUB or augmented EPUB. This is often ideal, but has a very high development and cost burden. So it's usually only available to the larger publishers. Or you could use a dedicated authoring and end user platform. You hear terms like LMS, VLE, that's learning management system or virtual learning environment that was designed for interactive and accessible digital textbooks. So these carry cost, but these problems are unavoidable. And finally, just to quickly talk about accessibility for AI, because everybody asks. And yes, for image description, as our other speakers have said, can be helpful for getting an initial prompt for a checking by a human afterwards. Most products on the market so far don't consider the context of the image. I have now seen some that are starting to try to do that. It's just early days. What an image means is contextual. The meaning of an image varies based on what book it's in, what section it's in, etc. Audience assumptions, their reading level, the position in the individual publication, and just subject norms. Is description even needed? So decorative or surrounding, if the image is decorative, if it's described by surrounding text, or if the caption is already sufficient, then perhaps it didn't need a description. Is the AI describing every image when that wasn't needed? And then there are the IP considerations of using AI. So does the AI respect copyright? Who owns the model? Who's hosting it? Is it using your material for training itself? If it is it applying that training and what it's learned to other publishers' content? These are really important questions to ask. And other uses for AI, I think Christina mentioned this, it's very early days for that. It might have a role in semantic markup, which is kind of adding layers of meaning to code to help assistive technology to work better. That can be quite subjective, so it will be a challenge for AI, but it might be something in its future. And accessibility metadata, some early products are now arriving to attempt to use machine learning and AI to do this. Usually it's more scripting than AI as such, but really, again, human checks are needed. And to go to a more optimistic perspective, what are the opportunities that accessibility and accessible publishing present to us? Well, beyond compliance, as was aptly demonstrated in Simon's talk, this is a massive potential market expansion. It will improve your reputation and show your commitment to inclusivity. And broadly speaking, and this is my favorite point, accessible content is just better digital content. It usually displays more consistently across platforms. It's more portable. The files are more future-proof, and it works better with AI for anything you might want to develop to that end in the future. Rich data is better data. It can also help you stay relevant as procurement gets ahead of legislation. So individual institutions might have higher requirements of what they will buy in for their students than necessarily the letter of the law. It's also just a good moment to assess and optimize what are very often highly entrenched processes. You know, publishers will often stay on the same supplier contract for many, many years. So this is a good moment to think about some of that. And finally, accessibility and the future. Accessible files are inherently more future-proof due to their superior structure and semantic richness. So this develops what I was talking about a moment ago. These files are easier to repurpose and transform. If you're trying to sell this idea to your own higher-ups, you might mention to them that if any of them remember EPUB 2 to 3, well, if EPUB 4 comes along, it'll be a lot easier to convert rich, well-constructed, accessible ebooks to a new format. Wider markets are available. You're prepared for future legislation and for any future platform changes. So these are big and expensive changes to your processes and your products. But this big shift is only once. You know, we're talking about improving processes, not just improving output. And that's all I had to share with you today. I hope that was helpful. I had to kind of rush through, but we really have an amazing array of speakers here and some really fantastic wisdom. So I do encourage you to ask questions of all of us as we share knowledge and attempt to crack this problem together. Thank you.
Thank you to Simon Mellin. It was very thoughtful presentation, very comprehensive. And now leaving the stage to Stacey Scott, who is head of accessibility at Taylor & Francis, that will tell us about what Taylor & Francis is doing to prepare for the European Accessibility Act. Please, Stacey.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you so much for having me. I am the fifth speaker, so apologies if I say anything that has already been covered. So I will talk more broadly about the work of Taylor & Francis rather than the detail that we've heard so brilliantly from our speakers up until now. I'll also give your eyes a rest from slides, so I'll just talk, so you can feel free to look at me, look at somewhere else in the room, or look at the translation. And so I've worked in accessible publishing and inclusive education for around 20 years now. I currently wear several accessibility hats, the main one being head of accessibility for Taylor & Francis, and the other being the chair of the Publishing Accessibility Action Group. Taylor & Francis is a scholarly publisher, quite large, and we publish both HSS and STEM content. I myself, like Simon Holt, also have both personal and professional interest in accessible publishing. I am completely blind and always have been, so I very much rely on accessible solutions. So key areas of focus for the European Accessibility Action Group. So, European Accessibility Action Act, Accessibility Act. So, as Simon Holt covered very well earlier, there are many people that will be affected by accessible products and implementation of the EAA. So with this in mind, accessibility has been a huge part of Taylor & Francis' work for around 10 years now, preceding any European accessibility action. We very much believe that accessibility should be part of business as usual processes and shouldn't rely on legislation to push things forward. So our work continues outside of EAA compliance whilst we make sure that we are also tackling areas covered by the EAA. And those areas I'll talk about today. The first thing we did was to make sure that our internal accessibility working group was aware of the EAA and what it meant for each individual area. This allows for resource and budget planning in building that all-important business case. We devised and we are implementing a business-wide accessibility strategy to make sure that we cover all key points. Particularly in a large publisher, this is quite difficult to make sure that you don't miss anybody out. And so a huge amount of work has gone into simply making sure that all the key stakeholders are involved in the conversations. And this is why the internal accessibility working group has been so effective. Of course, we work a lot with our internal legal team as well to make sure that we have a correct interpretation as put forth by them. Hashtag I'm not a lawyer either. To make sure that we are working in the way that we think we should be and interpreting the EAA accurately. As we all know, the key challenge is often just understanding what the EAA is referring to and what you need to do. So some of the key questions that Taylor & Francis asked themselves when the EAA was announced. So what are the rules of the EAA and how does it apply to us at Taylor & Francis? What are the penalties for both us as a business, but also for our customers? What is the impact if we don't make things accessible? Analysis work. What is the gap? What are the gaps in our current offerings? And what do we need to prioritize? Another question, what are some quick wins? What can we do now? Not quick wins for us, but for our customers. What can we do to get things moving now whilst we build the processes that we need to get things moving forward? And finally, who should we be working with? And this is one of the most important areas for me, is that community. So who should we be working with to build knowledge and support in this area? So for example, the Publishing Accessibility Action Group, Daisy's Inclusive Publishing, Benetech, the W3C, and so many more, including Italy's own Lilia Foundation, who've been incredibly supportive. So the key areas that we focused on, the main areas that I call the 3 E's, ebooks, e-commerce, and e-readers. So for us, all of our EPUBs have to be in EPUB 3, and this is nearly complete. So we have in every single book that we put, that Taylor & Francis produces, is produced in both EPUB and PDF. They're reflowable, semantically enriched, and come with accessibility featured built in. This means that they are what we call born accessible. This is the ultimate goal, is to make everything that we have born accessible. So one of those key accessibility features that has been mentioned before is, of course, image description. So for us, our vendors write all of our front-end image descriptions. That is a part of the contract that we have with them. When they're producing a book, it must be complete with all alt text. And so all of our front list as of June 2024 going forward, every book will be produced with complete 100% image descriptions. These image descriptions are, of course, checked in-house and by subject matter experts and end users as well, including me. We don't solely, contrary to I guess most publishers in the space, we don't solely focus on the most popular titles, because we don't want to neglect some key areas that may not be as popular, but they're just as vital to make sure they're described. So say, for example, we might be, by focusing on the popular titles only, we might be doing a lot of HSS work, but neglecting more complex materials like STEM or medicine or music. And so we took the approach that we would look at the popular titles, but that we had to have a clear and a representation across all the different subjects to make sure that we aren't neglecting any particular group or students. One of the parts of this, and I mentioned before that the vendor is now responsible for producing image descriptions for our front end titles. And it's so important that you make sure that you are choosing the right vendors to work with. When you're having those conversations, when you're signing the contract, do they talk to you about accessibility, about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, European Accessibility Act and other? Do they understand? Is it something that's already built into their workflow? Do they have subject matter experts? These are all really important questions, because that's going to make a difference between actually this can be done and this can't. Because if you work with a vendor and they don't have any knowledge of how to do this, you're going to have to train them. And some will be more responsive than others. And so making sure that that is embedded at the very beginning of a relationship is just so important for us. Backlist has already been mentioned. So for us, our backlist is roughly around over 170,000 books. So it's quite substantial. Allowing the vendors to input image description for front-end titles has meant that our production, editorial teams and authors can focus on filling out our backlist. And so we have multiple workflows to make sure that happens. And again, all getting checked as well. Similar to what Simon Holt said, that we've had for about 10 years now, we've had a process where any customer can come to us and say, I need this book in an alternative format. And we aim to get that to them between 1 and 3 days. And that's hugely important, because it's the difference again between somebody being able to access vital content in their studies and somebody sitting waiting on a book with nothing else, no other resource available to them. Going on to my other e-readers, we've done ebooks, we'll look at e-readers. So again, as covered, I won't go into too much detail because I think Simon Mellon's covered this brilliantly. We decided to build our own e-reader so that we could have control over the functionality and specifically the accessibility, to make sure that it complies with the EAA, but that also that it can ingest and accurately display metadata. Another interesting example of, I guess in a way, a reader platform that hasn't actually come up, certainly by the English speakers, and I'm surprised, is partnering with institutions like Bookshare, RNIB Bookshare in the UK, Bookshare in the US by Benetech. These are really strong platforms with over 1 million books on each of them that provide those books on a fully accessible platform. And so if you're not using that accessible e-reader yet, or you're building it in-house but it's not ready, making sure that your content is available on those accessible platforms is hugely beneficial to users as well. Of course, we need to mention accessibility metadata, as Simon Mellons did, making sure that people can discover that content and they can find out, well, is this book accessible to me? Does it have what I need? Does it have image descriptions? That's a very important point before you purchase or even download a book. What you don't want is to have spent a lot of money making a book accessible and people are downloading the non-accessible copy because you haven't made it clear in the metadata that there is an accessible version available. Platforms, incredibly important, making sure that the access to the content, and again, this is where if you're not ready, you can use Bookshare, but generally your platforms and websites need to be accessible. And WCAG, so with content accessibility guidelines, WCAG compliant. And this connects very closely to e-commerce, which we've heard about, the functionality of being able to, that journey of discovering, finding, purchasing, and also the final, confirmation emails, all of that aspect, those aspects of e-commerce needs to be considered and made accessible as part of the EAA. And so that's something that obviously Taylor & Francis, we for the majority of our products, this is the case, and it certainly will be the case for the other smaller products that we have come June 2025. A way of showcasing your accessibility, showcasing what you're doing in accessibility and how you're complying with things like the EAA is really important. And so having your accessibility conformance reports, or VPATs, voluntary product accessibility templates, and accessibility statements are really, really important. Making sure that if a customer comes to you and says, can you show me your compliance level? Can you show me what you're doing in accessibility? You should be able to evidence this immediately. And so, for example, if you search Taylor & Francis corporate accessibility statement, you can read about absolutely every single thing that we're doing towards accessibility. So some other key areas, there's some that we've touched on, so ancillaries, so other content that's considered within the ebook, such as maybe flashcards, PowerPoints, videos. This is something that Taylor & Francis has decided might not be covered under the EAA specifically. We're not entirely clear on that one, but we've decided that it is, for us, it is a massive part of making sure that an ebook is, as we want to say, fully accessible. Can an ebook really be truly inclusive to everyone if part of that ebook, of the ancillary parts, are not accessible to everyone? So we decided no. Artificial intelligence already been covered, something that we're very keen to work on. Personally, as a blind person, I've found that the advancement in AI over the past year to 18 months is incredible. I certainly work with a couple of AI engines that do produce really, really detailed pictorial descriptions. And you can, using the kind of LLM model, you can also interact with those engines now to say, okay, tell me more about this aspect, or leave out the background detail, just tell me the forefront. And it's changing all the time, and I think it's one of the most exciting areas coming up. It can do a lot of the heavy lifting. I think it doesn't work as well when it comes to matters in science, technology, engineering, maths, medicine. But certainly for HSS titles, I would absolutely say that it's been, certainly the trial that we're currently running is extremely useful for us. One thing I always say though is I would never leave the engine running unattended. So that means we would never just generate our image description using AI and put it in a book and put it on the shelf, digital or otherwise, because we want to make sure that it is contextually appropriate. And as Simon Mellon's talked about, we don't want it to just simply be tagged. We don't want it to be repeating what's already in a paragraph. And so there's so much work going on there for so many publishers. But I think that's a really exciting area to definitely to be watched over the next, probably over the next year. I think we're going to see some quite incredible things. STEM, I've mentioned STEM, medicine, including medicine and music, and mathematics obviously being a huge part of that. So we sit on many groups, our accessibility people across Taylor & Francis, and one of those is to make sure that we are inputting as much as we can to make STEM content more accessible. And now that MathML can be embedded in an EPUB and read by a screen reader, that's taken us a huge step forward. And so again, as a mathematics graduate myself, that's one of the key things that I'm keen to see going forward. So just to kind of sum up, I suppose, so by becoming fully EAA compliant, you become born accessible. And again, this is what we want. We want accessibility to be part of business as usual processes. We want everything to be born accessible and inclusive. As Simon Mellon says, born accessible, inclusivity, it's good for business. it makes sense. Why would you want to exclude 1 billion customers? I don't think anyone would want to do that. Accessibility absolutely benefits everyone. It penalizes no one. And so heading towards full compliance and full inclusion is where we need to be. The way that we need to get there, looking at future updates to W3C standards, ensuring that we have more accessible content across the board. So HSS, science, technology, engineering, maths, science, all of the different areas that I've already mentioned. This can only really be done by combined effort and dedication. And this is where the power of the accessible publishing community really comes into its own. And that includes everyone on this call, all of the speakers, and everyone that I interact with on a day-to-day basis. It wouldn't be possible without that sense of community and allyship. So on that note, I will hand back, but thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me today.
Thank you, Stacey, for your speech and for your beautiful conclusion. Really appreciate. Passiamo all'italiano per l'ultimo intervento. Lascio la parola a Christian Bernareggi, che ci parlerà invece dell'accessibilità ai documenti PDF generati da LaTeX. Prego, Christian.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Christian Bernareggi from Pauline Lab at Torino University in Italy. This lab is committed to investigate technologies and educational solutions to improve access to scientific subjects for persons who are blind, visually impaired, and have different disabilities. In this work, I present some problems and our solution about enhancing PDF accessibility for those PDF created by using LaTeX system, and for those PDF that can then make available scientific content, especially those containing formulae. This work is this accessibility workflow concerns especially persons who are blind or have low vision, but it can be in the future extended to other kinds of disabilities according to the provisions of web content accessibility guidelines. So let's take a look at how persons who are blind or have visual impairments can access digital document. Actually, as it is well known here, they use basically screen readers or braille lines, or even magnifiers and screen adaptation, visualization adaptation when persons with low vision are concerned. These tools and these assistive tools are useful and very worldwide available, but they do not solve any kind of accessibility issue, especially when formulae are concerned. When formulae are included in a document, there are some possible strategies, for example, to use MathML plus HTML or MathJax, or even some screen reader extensions to transform the formula into speech, but not only as a text to speech, but including hierarchical exploration of formulae. However, these formats are not always used in publishing. In particular, PDF documents are very widespread, and are widespread also in the scientific community. Especially in the scientific community and in some areas of scientific publishing. Let's think, for example, to the process that start from LaTeX and go to PDF documents in producing papers, proceedings of conferences in science and technology and mathematics. PDF documents are produced according to the workflow that includes a LaTeX template and then subsequent transformation, and in the end, the production of a final document that is a PDF document. These PDF documents are not natively accessible. They are not born accessible documents, especially due to the limitation of LaTeX for including accessibility features since the beginning of this process. What we did in this lab at Torino, at Pauline Lab in Torino University, the mathematics department, we developed a package, a LaTeX package that can include in PDF document the source LaTeX comments, and that it can be read through a speech synthesizer on a braille line. It is available for free since 2018, but the work is going on. The first release actually had some limitation, especially concerning the few environments that were available. For example, multi-line environments were not available at all. And it also had issues concerning tagging of PDF. Moreover, it was based on undocumented proprietary features of PDF readers. That is not a viable strategy for producing widespread accessibility workflows. So this package was updated, and in particular now it is available, and it is extends the previous version with new environments, with partial tagging of PDF documents, and now this package can be reached on CITAN repository, and it is distributed in the Tech Live distribution. So everyone who uses Tech can find it and may decide whether or not to use it. Concerning the environment, now it supports many more environments, all of those that are included in the AEM stack from the American Mathematical Society. And concerning the tagging, it includes at least some basic tagging. This is not based on Tag PDF STY package. This is not a full tagging of these PDF documents, but it's a step forward towards a more structured document that can be that can include accessibility feature from its birth. There are also some additional tools that we are investigating, especially dictionaries for screen readers, but not only dictionaries. In particular, we aim to extend it to something like a parser that can read more and more accurately formula, and can enable persons to explore them and to listen to pieces of formula, so they can better read even long formula present, for example, in exercise books for STEM content. Another, so our work was also to test this package on some repositories. Especially we tested on archive, and we also described and documented a procedure just to include the package in the source LaTeX and generate a PDF that can include LaTeX in the document, and can be available also from archive itself. This is our work in the direction of born accessible PDF documents, starting from LaTeX source. Of course, this is a first. This is not a production package that can be used everywhere under any condition in the publishing industry. It's a first step. We are also still working on it in cooperating with the International PDF Association and the tech community. For example, especially concerned with tagging, that is it's an important feature for accessibility and for compliance with to the provisions of the European Accessibility Act, and also by converting and transforming LaTeX in PDF also in other formats. For example, MathML, that can be even from today, they are better supported also by screen readers and by some kinds of assistive technologies that, for example, braille displays. So this is a way towards accessibility, STEM accessibility. We really wish to extend this package in the future, and we are doing this. We very well known that there are a number of still a number of limitations, but it can improve at its present release. It can highly improve accessibility, especially of this kind of PDF documents. So I thank you for your attention, and should you have any question, please ask. Thank you.
Grazie a Cristian Bernareggi per il suo interessante intervento e la presentazione del software che poi è pubblicato, appunto, disponibile pubblicamente. Ricordo che il webinar è stato registrato, quindi riceverete sia la registrazione che tutto il materiale con anche i contatti dei vari relatori. Vi sto scrivendo in chat anche l'indirizzo email di Caterina Sganga, che ha dovuto lasciarci da qualche minuto, che ringrazia e appunto vi invita a contattarla via mail se volete approfondire. Io non prendo altro tempo, ringrazio tutti i nostri relatori, ringrazio Cenfor e tutto lo staff per l'organizzazione e lascio la parola ad Anna Merlo se vuole fare un saluto finale.
Ringrazio tutti gli partecipanti, che sono stati molti, e i relatori, ovviamente, anche Nicola Cavalli, che ci dà sempre una mano nel coordinamento di questi eventi. E a mio avviso, dicevo, me lo dico da sola, però è stato molto interessante. Abbiamo messo insieme tutta una serie di problematiche, argomenti, opportunità che vale la pena poi di approfondire o con i singoli relatori o, se volete, attraverso noi, nel senso che Cenfor si occupa di accessibilità dal 2017-2018 ed è un'attività che noi svolgiamo a fianco di quella che è il nostro core business, che riguarda la commercializzazione delle banche dati. E quindi invito a contattare i vari relatori perché secondo me c'è molto ancora da imparare, insomma. Mi piace l'idea dei training in EAA di cui ha parlato la Cristina Mussinelli. Sono rimasta molto impressionata anche dalla presentazione di Simon Mellins, che è un consulente a livello europeo dei più importanti publisher. E quindi, insomma, sono contenta che si sia svolto in questo modo e vi do appuntamento ai prossimi webinar che Cenfor organizzerà proprio nell'ottica di affiancare editori e bibliotecari, biblioteche, nello scoprire tutte queste nuove possibilità e nel cercare di dare un contributo. Grazie a tutti e a presto, arrivederci.